There is a Pink Floyd song that begins with a kazoo. Not a guitar, not a haunting organ, not one of the vast cosmic soundscapes the band would soon become famous for. A kazoo. That buzzing, comical, childish toy of an instrument, the sound of a birthday party, a cartoon, a schoolyard. And yet, hidden inside this silly, almost ridiculous little song, is the seed of one of the darkest, most personal, and most important themes that Pink Floyd would ever explore across their entire career: the death of a father in war, and the lifelong wound that such a loss leaves behind. The song is called Corporal Clegg, and it is one of the strangest and most quietly revealing tracks the band ever committed to tape, because it is, in the truest sense, a tragedy wearing the mask of a joke. Most listeners pass over it. The band themselves seemed almost embarrassed by it. And yet, understood properly, it is nothing less than the overture to 2 decades of their greatest and most furious work. To understand why it matters so much, you have to know exactly where it sits in the band's story. Corporal Clegg appears on the album A Saucerful of Secrets, released in 1968, the record made in the agonizing transitional period as Syd Barrett was being eased out, and David Gilmour was searching for his place in a band that did not yet know what it was becoming. It is a record full of uncertainty and experiment, a band feeling in the dark for a new identity now that its founder was gone. And tucked into the middle of it is this peculiar track, written by Roger Waters, that carries a distinction the casual listener almost never registers. It is the very first Pink Floyd song to deal with the subject of war. The first. And that fact matters enormously, because war, and specifically the death of a soldier and the absence of a father, would become the central obsession that drove some of the band's most monumental work for the next 20 years. Everything that came later, the long meditations on loss and absence, the rage against the institutions that send young men to die, the grief for fathers who never came home, the entire towering edifice of the band's most ambitious statements about conflict and its human cost, all of it begins here, in this odd little song with a kazoo in it. And the reason it begins here is devastatingly personal. Roger Waters' own father, Eric Fletcher Waters, was killed in the Second World War at Anzio in Italy, when Roger was only an infant, leaving a void in the boy's life that the man would spend his entire artistic existence trying to name, to fill, to understand, to forgive, and to rage against. Corporal Clegg is the first time Waters reached directly into that wound. And what is fascinating, what makes the song so strange and so worthy of study, is the manner in which he chose to reach into it. He did not write a solemn ballad. He did not write a dignified lament. He wrote a sardonic, almost vaudevillian piece of black comedy. The song tells the story of a soldier, Corporal Clegg, who returned home from the war with a wooden leg, and the lyric pointedly describes that wooden leg as something he won in the war, as though a shattered and amputated body were a prize, a trophy, a medal to be displayed with pride. That single sarcastic word, won, contains the entire bitter heart of the song. It is the language of a society that dresses up mutilation as glory, that hands a broken man a medal from the Queen and calls his ruined life an honor and his agony a service. Waters takes the official, patriotic, parade ground story of war, the medals, the pride, the stiff upper lip, and he soaks the whole thing in acid. There is even a wife in the song, apparently drowning her own grief and disappointment in drink. A small portrait of how the damage of war does not stay on the battlefield, but seeps into the home, into the marriage, into the next generation. And the music itself performs that same savage irony, and this is where the real genius hides, the thing that makes the song so much more than a curiosity. The band wraps this grim story of a broken, shell-shocked veteran and his unhappy household in a bright, bouncy, almost relentlessly cheerful arrangement, complete with that absurd kazoo, played by David Gilmour, bouncing comically back and forth between your left and right ears in the stereo mix. The contrast between the jaunty sound and the desolate subject is not a failure of tone. The contrast is the entire point. The contrast is the weapon. By making the music sound like a children's sing-along, like a music hall novelty number, the band exposes the obscene cheerfulness with which societies habitually package the horror of war. The way a nation can take a man's physical destruction and turn it into a jaunty, sentimental story of national pride and noble sacrifice. The kazoo is not silly by accident or by failure of taste. The kazoo is an accusation. It is the sound of a culture whistling a happy tune over a mass grave. Listen, too, to the layers of voices, because this song is a genuine oddity in the catalogue for that reason alone. It features the band almost as a chaotic, overlapping chorus, with multiple members singing different lines, including what is essentially the only lead vocal contribution that drummer Nick Mason would ever make in the band's history, his voice surfacing among the others, delivering lines about the medal and the war. Toward the end, the track dissolves deliberately into a jumble and cacophony of voices, with an officer barking at his one-legged soldier, informing him with bureaucratic indifference that he is excused from parade from now on. The cold, administrative cruelty of an institution that breaks men and then files them away. And around these words, the band can be heard almost laughing, even seeming to break character, to corpse in the chorus. It is uncomfortable to listen to. It is meant to be uncomfortable. The laughter is the laughter of a world that cannot bear to look directly at what it has done to its own sons, and so it giggles and looks away. Now here is the irony nested within the irony, the detail that makes this song a perfect emblem of exactly where the band stood in 1968, caught between what they had been and what they would become. One contemporary critic dismissed Corporal Clegg as too beatly, too obviously indebted to the whimsical music hall pastiche that the Beatles were producing around the same time. And the band seemed to agree in their way, because Corporal Clegg was never, not even once, performed live by Pink Floyd. They appeared almost embarrassed by it, this strange little experiment in black comedy that did not fit the cosmic, serious, increasingly grand image they were beginning to construct for themselves. They tucked it away and moved on, treating it as a minor oddity, a song that did not quite belong. And yet, listened to now, with the full knowledge of everything that came after, Corporal Clegg is the opposite of a throwaway. It is a prophecy. It is the overture to a lifetime of work. The anti-war fury that would later fill entire sides of vinyl, the towering rage against the generals and the politicians and the whole machinery that feeds young men into conflict, the aching, unhealable grief for a father who marched away and never returned. All of it is present here, in compressed miniature, disguised as comedy, smuggled past the listener under the cover of a buzzing kazoo. The magic of Corporal Clegg lies precisely in this disguise, and once you hear it, you can never unhear it. It is a song that uses silliness as camouflage for sorrow. It hides a fatherless son's grief inside a music hall joke. It buries what would become the single most important emotional theme of an entire band's future inside a track that everyone, critics and band members alike, was happy to overlook and dismiss. It is, in the deepest sense, the sound of Roger Waters discovering, perhaps without yet fully realizing what he had found, what the great subject of his life and his art was going to be, and approaching that subject sideways, through irony and humor, because the direct approach, the naked grief, was still far too painful for a young man to attempt head-on. The joke was the only door he could yet bear to open. So the next time you hear that ridiculous, buzzing kazoo bouncing cheerfully through Corporal Clegg, and you are tempted to smile and dismiss it as a bit of psychedelic-era silliness, stop and ask yourself what you are actually listening to. Are you hearing a joke, or are you hearing a wound? Was the band laughing at all, or were they simply finding the only way they could yet bear to begin saying the thing that they would spend the rest of their lives trying, with ever greater fury and sorrow, to say?